Here on the show, we explore the work done by our elected representatives at all levels and what they get up to on the ground as policymakers and to serve those who elect them.
And this week, for the first time, we speak to someone from local government about her work.
And I'm delighted to say we're joined now in the studio by Councillor Gabriella Giles, who represents the ward of Chiswick Riverside in West London. Gabriella, thank you for coming and joining us this morning as our first local government representative.
Good morning, thank you for having me.
Not at all. So I think when people think of councillors, they think of streetlights, potholes and dog poo, unfortunately. But it's so much more than that, isn't it?
And to be honest, that would cover a lot of what we have to do. But yes, it does cover a lot of it, a lot more than that. So housing, a lot of the time doing a lot of the work that the council hasn't done itself, and acting as an intermediary between the council and the people that we've been elected to represent. So that to me is actually the most important piece of what I do, is acting on behalf of people who haven't necessarily or have already exhausted the bureaucratic routes that they need to do in order to get things like their bins fixed, leaks sorted, the potholes and various other things. But there is a lot more to the role of a councillor that is probably a bit more political rather than just administrative.
Well, because of course you are in opposition on Hounslow Council. So how do you find that when it comes to the sort of wider council policy? Must be frustrating at times.
Extremely. And resilience and persistence is what's actually really needed in that role. So we are 10 out of 60. Hounslow Council has been Labour-led more or less since its inception, bar 4 years. And that was back in 2010. So there has, for me, I find the role really, really interesting because as an opposition, you're there to be that critical kind of like you can do better type person. I wouldn't say necessarily a critical friend, it depends on what you're discussing, but certainly you can push for more that they may not have necessarily thought about before.
Is it a thankless task, Gabriella, being a councillor? The reason I say that is obviously because with MPs, they're in the public spotlight, people can see what they're doing, they appear on TV and stuff, but with councillors, it's very much kind of under the radar, and often voters won't know who their councillors are or what they do. So it's public service without much reward.
It is. Like we don't. It's not a full-time role, for example, to start off with. So many people are either retired, or you get like at the younger end of the spectrum, people who are students. So. It does become quite frustrating to manage kind of responsibilities in and out of work with some of the expectations on what you should be doing as a councillor, because you don't actually have the same support that you would do as an MP, for example.
No. I was a councillor, so I know what it's like. But one of the great things about it is that you are closest to the constituents. I mean, and the issues that maybe matter most to them, which may not be big issues, are the things that you're sorting out for them. And they don't forget that whenever you do it.
They don't. And we've got elections in a month, so we've been out kind of speaking to residents, as we would do always. And it's been really great to know, you helped me with fix the pothole, or there was a drain cover that kept on making a huge amount of noise that was keeping me up through sleepless nights. So that's where you find, or I find, I get the most amount of reward out of it.
The thing that I find sort of the most amusing is that you would think that the MPs have all the power, and on the national sort of policy stuff we do, but when it comes to actually getting the potholes fixed, I have far less power than you do.
and I would also argue that as a councillor, we make a lot more decisions that impact people on a day-to-day basis. So, we a couple of years ago, the council passed a motion to set its climate change targets. But what was really interesting is that in that motion, they hadn't actually put a date on it. So we were able to put a date on that and amend the motion so that they could progress things a bit quicker. But at the same time, they hadn't thought about setting a timeline for their own ambitions, which seems to me rather convoluted and kind of naive. So they didn't set the target for their climate change ambitions, but actually since we put them under pressure, we've seen so many more changes happening that wouldn't have happened at the same rate as which they happened.
So We've spoken about the hyper-local stuff, but actually, as a councillor, you can get involved in even bigger national campaigns.
Yes.
So, talk to us about seals.
Yes, yes.
So we're never expected to say on air, but...
Yeah.
No, so as a councillor, I sit on the board of the Chiswick Pier Trust, which is a charity that's supported by the council, but is there to provide access to the community to the river, and it's all about promotion of the river. And last year, we had a beautiful little seal come into our stretch of the river called Freddie Mercury. And
of
for
course.
many... Well, Freddie Mercury was also a Hounslow resident, so we had this beautiful seal that came in. He'd had a big adventure, and he kept on coming up to our part of the Thames, which isn't... we're not in the estuary. We are kind of nearer to Richmond and kind of pretty upstream. But we had seen this Freddie, and he'd been bobbing around and being very sociable. And we thought it was fantastic. So I had actually contacted the medic at the British Divers Marine Life Rescue, Mary Tester, and saying, right, we see this. We know that there's a potential risk because of dogs, and what can we do to support and promote keeping seals such as Freddie, because there were about 4,000 in the Thames, seals such as Freddie safe from people who have rediscovered the Thames during lockdown and have also bought a lot of dogs that not necessarily have given them the right training, or, you know, when you're out in the countryside, you know that if you go into a field, you put your dog on the leash, you close all this stuff. But because we are in London, that rationale isn't necessarily thought of in the same way. So we started kind of thinking about what we could do, and then unfortunately he died. And
after an attack by a dog?
After an attack by a dog, yes.
Yeah. And whilst those conversations were ongoing as well, which must have been
Exactly. It was quite frustrating because, you know, we were trying to do stuff, but we hadn't necessarily got the time and the timings right. And as a result of that, it kind of spurred a team into action. We've got a team called Seal Watch, which are a group of residents and sports people from around the river by Kew Bridge, and we are working with the London Zoo to get them trained up so they can become official seal watchers. And
you even had some parliamentary input, didn't you?
And we did, and it's been really fantastic. So we've got signs, we've had stuff from DEFRA, and then we noticed that there was a hole in legislation. There was a gap. There was nothing in UK legislation that covered the harassment of seals and from dogs or humans. And so we did a bit of research, and we were able to get a 10-minute rule read at the beginning of February, which was read by Tracy Crouch, which was really fantastic, and it was passed at the first reading. So it means that it's going on to a green paper now, which will be really fantastic. And we've got funding from DEFRA for signs. We've put stuff up in my ward. And we are working with the other boroughs of Richmond and Hammersmith and a lot of the rowing clubs around our beautiful stretch of the river.
It's
just sorted.
Just goes to show the wider impact that a good, effective councillor you can have.
Yeah, and it's about leveraging your networks.
Absolutely.
As well.
Well, Gabriella, thank you so much for joining us on here this morning. Councillor Gabriella Giles there, representative for Chiswick Riverside on Hounslow Council.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows, and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.